Hi, my name is Niramet, and today I'm be discussing. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so yeah, let me start. Hi, I'm Niramet, and as our society grows more and more progressive, students are becoming more and more comfortable with their sexual identity and their true selves. But if certain students' experiences are ignored in school sex ed classes, they're less likely to relate to the content, and they're more willing to behave in risky and dangerous activities. Before I go on, I'm just going to clarify that LGBTQ plus is an acronym that stands for lesbians, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer. The claim that I'm proposing today is that LGBTQ plus materials needs to be inducted to school sex ed classes. I will try to prove this point by stating that one, LGBTQ plus youths don't really have many adults to talk to when it comes to sex, so they're more likely to go online and look up those information themselves. Number two, STDs are on the rise in the LGBTQ community thanks to social media apps and hookup apps. And number three, sex ed classes can be like a venue used to present other sexual orientations, genders, and non-heterosexual stuff to teach acceptance to non-gay students. Regarding my first claim that LGBT youths look up sex ed information online, in a study in 2017 from Planned Parenthood, they interviewed a focus group of 92 LGBTQ students, and almost all the participants said that they couldn't relate to the material because they just couldn't they couldn't relate to it because it was hetero focused. Most of them said that they looked up online their information, but because it's the internet, they couldn't trust the information. Either that or the terms they used were too technical for this, so they couldn't understand. So they were back to basically square one. Another study showed that even if the schools were given the option to include LGBTQ inclusive material, a study from Center of Disease Control and Prevention's 2012 school health profiles stated that in the states that allowed LGBTQ inclusive content, the percentage of secondary schools that actually provided sex education curricula or supplementary materials that were LGBTQ inclusive range from 8 to 44%. In other words, even if they were allowed to, they still kept their curriculum hetero-focused. The fact that the schools are actively avoiding LGBTQ materials means they are ignoring the safety of these students. They are left to scavenge for themselves and to look up information from imprecise websites and sketchy comments. The second reason, or the reason that this is such a big deal, is because of supporting claim number two. Social media and hookup apps are becoming mainstream, which in turn increases the STD rate in LGBTQ communities. With the rise of hookup apps like Tinder and Grindr, hookup culture has become a very prominent thing in the millennial era. Casual hookups and hookup culture, it doesn't really equate well, or doesn't really mix well with lack of knowledge, which is why it equates to higher STD rates. The CDC conducted a study in 2014 that states that sexually active gay and bisexual men accounted for 83% of primary and secondary syphilis cases. Gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men are 17 times more likely to get anal cancer than heterosexual men. This is thanks to the accessibility of hookup apps such as Tinder and Grindr. Because of this, unknowledgeable young adults have a free platform to explore their sexual orientation, but it also potentially exposes them to unwanted diseases. Aside from giving guidance and trying to lower the STD rates, another reason to include LGBTQ inclusive material into the school curriculum is to encourage acceptance and create a safer and less judgmental school environment. LGBTQ plus students are already frequently targets of bullying and harassment. Leaving out these students in sex ed implies that they're abnormal. And not only does this make them feel alienated, but it also affects their academic performance due to anxiety, depression, and stress. A national study conducted by the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States revealed that LGBTQ students who experience frequent harassments at school reports lower GPAs and those who are not harassed. And nearly 1 in 3 LGBT students have skipped classes to get away from it all because they feel unsafe. So not only do they have to deal with lower self-esteem and sometimes mental health issues, they also have poor academic performances. Teaching about different sexual orientation does not only help non-gay students learn to accept others, but it also help non-straight students fit in and not be ashamed of their differences. This in turn will create an overall better academic environment. Thank you.
Okay, the proposition's identified. There's a preview of the supporting structure. That's pretty good. I do think that you could explain a little bit more about the controversy, because you do have some data that suggests that there is a resistance to having this available, that schools generally don't make it available. You have the percentage of schools who allow this. It's only 8 to 44% end up using it. If there are prohibitions against it, if there are restrictions on it, I think that would demonstrate that there's a little bit more controversy at the beginning of the speech and a stronger reason to be talking about this. The signposting of the major claims at the beginning is pretty clear, so I can see what's going on. The first point, though, is a claim. It's really a little bit convoluted, because basically it's a couple of claims. It's a chain of arguments that you're building here on that first point. And the proof on that is, I think, not as strong as you want it to be. It basically comes down to if they don't get the information that they think they need or want to have in the schools, then they're going to find it someplace else, and then that's going to lead to a whole series of problems. So you've got a string of arguments that you're building here. The only thing that you really demonstrate is that some participants feel that they don't really get adequate representation in these classrooms or in the instruction that's going on there, and then there are consequences of that. That's a little underwhelming on the proof. I'm not exactly sure what the curriculum is that they would need to be able to relate to. Prevention of STDs, for instance, I would assume would be part of a sexual education program, and the fact that they don't get mentioned by whatever their sexual orientation is, I'm not sure how that would change the issue of the STD and preventing it and that sort of thing, except when it comes to maybe particular sexual practices. If there's a lack of discussion of those practices, then that I think you need a little bit more information on, and that would be more particular on that point. Then you did have the information that suggested that a variety of schools don't actually provide this kind of information, and I thought that was the better part of the argument. That's the information that I think needs to be followed up on a little bit. The notion that what they end up doing is going online to get this information, and that the online place they end up are on the social apps where they then are subject to all of these kinds of things. The hookup culture that you mentioned, that's largely a presupposition. I don't see information that suggests that this is any greater than it has been in the past because of these kinds of things. I think that there might be reason to believe that that's the case, but I didn't really see any information that shows that that's the case. The frequency with which sexually transmitted diseases are spread in those communities, the notion that it is related to a lack of knowledge as opposed to the sex practices that they engage in or the culture, for instance, I think that there might be some information there. In essence, it sounds like what you're saying is that the schools should be teaching LGBT youth not to engage in the hookup culture and make themselves subject to the potentially sexually transmitted diseases here, but you're going about it in kind of a backwards way, and I'm not sure that how that would work in the long run with the the cultures of those communities, whether or not they find that to be, I mean, if they find focus on heterosexual activity to be something that they aren't particularly interested in, will they find something that discourages them from engaging in the culture that they find themselves in to be appropriate? I don't know. That seems to be an assumption that needs some proof. And that's the last point on the last point especially, there's a kind of assumption that doing anything about this is going to change the way people think about these things. And I think we need some information on that. I think there's a lot of information that suggests that sex education hasn't been successful at changing practices among heterosexuals. Why do we think it's going to change practice among LGBTQ youth or among heterosexuals and their attitudes toward these things? You kind of see this as a panacea for these problems, but I'm not sure there's any evidence that shows that it works. And that's ultimately what your argument is, that this is going to fix the problem, and fixing the problem is the thing that is underwhelming in the proof on that third point. All right, thank you.